Hey everyone, my name is Mayday, and I am a Marvel Snap creator and part of the Marvel Snap creator program, and I am here with another entry in my series where I explain the lore and backstory of Marvel Snap characters. Today, we have a complicated one on our hands. We have Ben Reilly, aka Scarlet Spider, as you may know him in Marvel Snap. So, who is Ben Reilly? So, he is the last card introduced in the Spider season before we get into the next season, which at the time of this recording has been revealed. Won't say too much about that now. But Ben Reilly was introduced as the Scarlet Spider in Marvel Snap because that's kind of the alias that he's known most for. But he's actually gone through a lot of different aliases, changes, including being the main Spider-Man for a while. So let's get into it. Who is Ben Reilly? Ben Reilly is a clone of Peter Parker, as you may know. What you might not know is who created him, that being a villain by the name of the Jackal. The Jackal is a science teacher of Peter Parker's and Gwen Stacy's before she died. Turns out that the Jackal, aka Miles Warren, was creepily in love with Gwen Stacy. There was like a 20-year age gap. But yeah, Gwen Stacy died, which, as you know, happened because of, and I'll let the clip from The Amazing Spider-Man 2 speak for itself. Yeah, that. Anyway, so Miles Warren blamed Spider-Man specifically for this death. Now, he eventually was able to find DNA of Gwen Stacy, and he somehow was able to figure out how to perfectly clone a replica of people from the time that he got their DNA. How did he find this out? Comic books. It's the same way Mr. Sinister is able to figure out cloning, same way anyone is able to figure out cloning in the Marvel Universe. If you try hard enough with your scientific research, you can figure it out. One thing to note about these clones, they have all of the memories of what they had before they, died, or just when they, whatever scientists cloned them got their DNA from, so, they have their memories up to that point. And they can also undergo cellular degeneration. God, some of these words are hard to say. Science fiction stuff. So, Miles Warren was able to clone Gwen Stacy, but he also cloned Spider-Man from some DNA he got from just like a crime scene that Spider-Man was at. And he intended to clone Spider-Man, ending up finding out that he is Peter Parker in the process because the clone came out as Peter. Knowing who he was under the mask. So, this gave Miles Warren his target of who to aim for and who he blamed for Gwen Stacy's death. And he decided to torment Peter by sending over the Gwen Stacy clone, and eventually this led to the original Clone Saga, quote-unquote. It wasn't called the Clone Saga, but this happened in Spider-Man 149 in the 70s. This was when Miles Warren, aka the Jackal, fully becoming the Jackal, decided to unleash the Spider-Man clone on Spider-Man, proper. Both Peter Parkers, both Spider-Man, thought that they were the original and fought each other, and then the fight ended in a giant explosion. The Jackal was caught up in it, seemingly died, but not really, and both Spider-Man were covered in rubble. Only one jumped out of the rubble. Now, you would assume that it was the real Peter Parker, but they left it ambiguous as to which Peter Parker actually got out of the rubble. All we know is that they thought that he was the real Peter Parker, and so grabbed the body of the other Spider-Man, threw it down a smokestack, and that's the end of the story. It's just a short, one-off, Spider-Man adventure story where a villain creates a clone of Spider-Man, they fight, and happy ending, right? It shouldn't go anywhere, right? Yeah, no, it goes somewhere. So, in the 90s, Aunt May got sick. She gets sick a lot in the comics, and she almost dies a lot, but, Most of the time she doesn't. But, Aunt May got really sick, had to go to hospital, and Peter, facing a lot of grief at that time, went to a rooftop to think, ending up coming across a exact clone of him, coming across himself. He originally thought it was like some kind of doppelganger situation, maybe Mysterio, but no, it was an exact replica of him, and it turned out the clone from the 70s survived. The clone was actually saved by Jackal, who was alive, and ended up being let free after some, experimentation and torture, as you do. Jackal's a pretty bad dude, but he let the clone go. The clone tried to go home, and seeing Peter Parker hugging Mary Jane, realizing that he wasn't the original, he didn't have Peter's life, and he was just a nobody. That he was just nothing. So he decided to exile himself and go out of New York, travel all the way across America to the rest and just exile himself and try and create a new life there. So this happens during a story explaining kind of where the clone kind of went after he was presumed dead. This is called Spider-Man The Lost Years. It's a mini-series going over his time in the West. Gets a little dark because he kind of doesn't have any... He doesn't have any, like, sense of himself being a real person. He has gone into kind of a depressive spiral. He has the memories only from, like, Peter Parker in the 70s stories up to then, and this is freshly when Gwen Stacy died, so he's in a big depressive pit. He didn't have Mary Jane to get him out of that, so he started becoming kind of violent, and he managed to snap himself out of it just in time. He met someone who was going through a rough time as well and helped them get out of it, and that inspired him to want to be better. He met a woman by the name of Janine. So Janine was a woman who ended up revealing that she was the killer of her father, her abusive father, that she ended up shooting. So she was going through her own depressive spiral, and both the clone and Janine helped each other kind of heal from both of those experiences, with the clone ending up giving himself a proper name to rechristen himself as an actual living person, calling himself Ben Reilly. Ben from Uncle Ben, his Uncle Ben's first name, and Reilly from May Reilly being May Parker's, Aunt May's maiden name. So Ben Reilly. So he ended up dyeing his hair blonde for a while. He ended up getting it changed to brown before he came back to New York because, you gotta have to reveal that he looks exactly like Peter. And what happened was Janine was presumed dead at some point. Her death was faked, and so with nothing to lose and hearing that Aunt May was in the hospital, dying, potentially, he decided to come back to New York, and Peter Parker and him faced each other. They didn't get along for a little while. Peter Parker was very antagonistic towards Ben Reilly at first, obviously, but then Ben ended up helping Peter out against a current villain. At the time, he returned to New York and he ended up getting the trust of Peter, and Ben decided to work alongside Peter as another Spider-Man. They kind of came to the conclusion that maybe there could be two Spider-People in New York. Maybe there could be two Peter Parkers with their own lives. And they kind of became friends. And so, Ben Reilly not wanting to kind of step on Peter's toes. Ben Reilly was actually very cool about this, by the way. He's a pretty great guy, just kind of letting Peter still live his life, still letting Peter have what he has, but Ben wanting to have his own life, and so he created his own alias for himself. Not really knowing where to go with the whole Spider-Man thing, he got inspired by a knockoff Spider-Man hoodie in a store, which is the blue hoodie that he wears over his red costume. So he ended up making the red costume, stealing the hoodie, and ripping the arms off it, creating the Scarlet Spider costume. When he was satisfied with the costume, he went out and the Daily Bugle dubbed him the Scarlet Spider, which he actually doesn't like the name, but he went with it anyway, and Scarlet Spider and Spider-Man were like partners for a while. They were like brothers, kind of fighting villains at the same time, and having just being good mates together while fighting crime. It was actually a pretty good time for both of them because they both kind of allowed each other to heal from a lot of traumatic experiences that they were going through at the time. This is the 90s Clone Saga, which is very controversial because originally it was just supposed to be this story of Ben Reilly having survived, coming back, and then both Peter and Ben Reilly being able to coexist, with Peter Parker realizing that Mary Jane is pregnant and wanting to settle down with her to create a family, and Ben wanting to make sure that there's still a Spider-Man around, but also wanting Peter to have his own life, decided to take up the mantle of Spider-Man himself. Not before the twist of this story being that Peter was the real clone. Peter Parker, who we've been following since the original story, was the clone all along, is what this story proposes. Ben Reilly is not the clone, he was the original. And so Peter kind of goes into a depressive spiral. He decides, I just want to have a life with my, new family, with Mary Jane, and he gives up the webs and gives it to Ben Reilly. Ben Reilly becomes the new Spider-Man. He becomes the sensational Spider-Man, and he decides to take up the Spider-Man duties and become the official Spider-Man. Like, Ben Reilly was the official Spider-Man in the Spider-Man comic books for like a solid year. It was kind of crazy. Peter Parker was just not Spider-Man for that time. And yeah, Ben Reilly was Spider-Man. Peter moved away for a little while, and that was just how the status quo was. This was how the Clone Saga was kind of supposed to end, in that Peter was going to have his family, and, he would have his happy ending. Meanwhile, the comics would still have a Spider-Man in them, and that would be Ben Reilly. This was the original plan. This was going to be the status quo moving forward in the 90s. And then they decided to make it more complicated. Now, if you're wondering why the Clone Saga is such a controversial story, as I'm sure you have heard, this is the reason. Twists upon twists upon twists that just kind of make the story longer. Peter is the real clone, but maybe he's not. Turns out there are other clones of Peter other than Ben Reilly. And it gets really complicated when, say, this clone named Kane comes into the picture, who believes he's the real Spider-Man, but he's actually a clone suffering from the degeneration that clones go through if they're imperfect. So he's an imperfect clone who goes insane, and it gets really complicated and stretches on. The original people who wanted to do this Clone Saga and wanted that original ending ended up leaving because of editorial reasons, and new writers came on, they got new bosses, and they decided to turn the Clone Saga in a completely different direction. You all keeping up? Good, I hope so, because Ben Reilly as Spider-Man goes through a few more adventures until the Clone Saga's end. He joins the New Warriors, he fights Spider-Side, which is another clone, who, despite the edgy name, has kind of a silly superpower of being able to shapeshift like Play-Doh. Although, to be fair, I actually do think they do him well. In the modern era, there's a mini-series that kind of flashes back to this time period where Ben Reilly is Spider-Man, and they do kind of make him better. Ben Reilly was also there for the Onslaught event, where, in the X-Men comics, Onslaught was the big bad at the time, and Ben Reilly was involved in that. He even became Spider-Carnage for a bit, when Carnage escaped from prison by getting out of Cletus's body, And in order to save John Jameson, J. Jonah Jameson's son, Ben Reilly decided to bond to the Carnage symbiote, creating this really cool design that I really hope becomes a Scarlet Spider variant in Snap. I don't know, I think it would be really cool. But yes, the Clone Saga has to end at some point, so after 3 years of continuously messing around with the story, they eventually reveal it wasn't the Jackal who was messing with Spider-Man this whole time. It wasn't anyone but Norman Osborn. Does this make sense because he died by being impaled on his own glider after Gwen Stacy's death? Don't worry about it, he's alive now. And yes, this was definitely the plan the whole time. It was definitely intended to be Norman Osborn pulling the strings all along. It definitely wasn't a retcon in order to just end this saga that had been going on way too long and people just wanted to move on. So Norman Osborn ended up fighting both Ben Reilly and Peter Parker in a battle to the death, and Ben ends up getting killed by jumping in front of Green Goblin's glider when it's about to hit Peter. Ben Reilly crashes onto the ground below, and Peter hears his final words, which is, "Tell my niece about her Uncle Ben," because Peter and MJ found out they were going to have a daughter. Ben Reilly would have been her Uncle Ben, and he fades into dust, which confirms that he was the clone the whole time. Apparently when clones die, they fade into dust. That's just a thing that happens now. Turns out he was the true clone all along. Ben Reilly is dead. Not for long. He gets brought back later. He does have some legacy characters that kind of continue from him. For example, that Kane fellow I mentioned. He's great because he actually gets redeemed during the Spire Island event, which I actually mentioned in my Aranya video. He actually gets redeemed after taking on Peter's stealth suit. It's also known as the Big Time suit, and he repurposes it into his own Scarlet Spider suit. He ends up moving to Texas, and he becomes the new Scarlet Spider, and becomes kind of an anti-hero, Red Hood-ish version of Spider-Man. It's a good series. There's also the fact that in the 90s they did a What If comic on what if Peter Parker's daughter had actually survived. In canon, unfortunately, they ended the Clone Saga with Mary Jane being stillborn, which is kind of messed up. But this comic instead goes, no, what if their daughter had actually survived and becomes May, aka Mayday Parker, and becomes Spider-Girl. Now you might notice that Spider-Girl's outfit is actually similar to Ben Reilly's outfit that he wears during his time as Spider-Man. That is directly because in this story, after Ben Reilly's death, she hears stories of her Uncle Ben, gets inspired by him, and takes on his costume specifically. If you're wondering why she doesn't take on her dad's costume and instead takes on Ben's, which I actually think is a really sweet way to kind of honor Ben Reilly's legacy in that universe. However, that's unfortunately not canon, and in canon, instead, we skip ahead to the 2010s, where Ben Reilly gets resurrected by Miles Warren, aka the Jackal, and then he gets killed. And then he gets resurrected again, and then killed. It turns out the Jackal found the decayed body of Ben Reilly after Norman Osborn killed him, and decided to clone him and kill him over and over and over again to test the limits of truly how strong a clone could be, in order to be able to create the ultimate clone to kill Peter Parker for good. This didn't work out for him though, because Ben Reilly ended up getting freed and killing the Jackal, taking over his entire cloning operation and turning himself into a new Jackal. He took all of his cloning tech and created a new company known as New You. Now, because Ben Reilly got killed and then was resurrected and then killed over and over and over again, that kind of messed up his mental state something really bad. He went insane, essentially. And so when he became the new Jackal, he, in a demented sense, wanted to do good, but because he was crazy, he essentially had a giant master plan of bringing back everyone who had ever died in a Spider-Man comic back to life as clones. And then he was going to kill almost everyone in America and bring them back as clones. And the only way that they wouldn't degenerate, just like, say, Kane was degenerating from being a clone, is that they would need to take pills directly from New You. So, yeah, not a great guy anymore. Ben Reilly eventually confronts Peter Parker and convinces him to try and get on his side. He says, hey, we can bring back Uncle Ben, we can bring back anyone we've ever lost, and Peter rejects him. They end up fighting. Doc Ock ends up being a part of this after he disappears in Superior Spider-Man, which ends with him not being Superior Spider-Man anymore and dying. Doc Ock ends up coming back to life by Ben Reilly, and in response, Doc Ock ends up messing up the entire New You plan and the entire cloning plan, and ends up destroying all of the clones by giving them all degeneration. So the clones all get destroyed, New You ends up getting destroyed because of Spider-Man, and then turns out that the Jackal is alive, and Ben Reilly ends up actually properly killing him by throwing him under the burning remains of all of his cloning labs and everything like that. So, Ben Reilly isn't the Jackal anymore. That all got destroyed, and now Ben Reilly is somewhat no longer a villain because of all of this and everything that happened and how Peter destroyed his operation. Ben Reilly decided to reevaluate and decided to try and redeem himself. He ended up escaping to Las Vegas and decided, you know what? I'm gonna become Scarlet Spider again. I'm gonna get a new suit and I'm going to try and be a hero again. But because his mental state is incredibly unstable, he ended up getting schizophrenia and he became this kind of violent anti-hero around Las Vegas. And he had a new suit for a while, and then he lost it and stole a cosplayer's instead, going back to the old suit because fans didn't like the new one. I'm only mentioning this because it turns out that this suit is actually already in Marvel Snap as a variant for Peter Parker's Spider-Man. I'm not sure why. I assume this was a decision made before Scarlet Spider was made into his own card. But yeah, so he ends up trying to seek redemption, and Kane, as, you know, his own Scarlet Spider, as the second Scarlet Spider, ends up actually trying to hunt him down. What's interesting about this series that I want to mention is that he actually gets the attention of Lady Death herself. So, Death herself actually comes to Scarlet Spider and reveals that he has died more than anyone in the entire universe. He has the world record for having died and resurrected the most times in the Marvel Universe. And that if he died one more time, he would fully go insane. So, that's a fun fact for you. Anyway, this series kinda ends on an ambiguous note of when Ben Reilly is going to return or what he's going to do next. And what ends up happening next is that in about 4 years or so, there is this Spider-Man story arc that you might be familiar with because it's relatively recent, called Spider-Man Beyond. This corporation, called the Beyond Corporation, ends up approaching Ben Reilly specifically and goes, hey, we want to create company-owned superheroes. Superheroes that get funding from big corporations and go save people while we invest in the superhero and it all works out for everyone. With Ben Reilly not really having a place in the world, he decides to take the opportunity and he becomes a new Spider-Man. He becomes a Spider-Man again with a new costume and luck would have it, Peter ends up getting knocked out into a coma because of a fight organized by the Beyond Corporation. Right before Peter gets kind of knocked out into that coma and has to recover, he does give Ben his blessing that he can be Spider-Man again in the nick of time so that the Beyond Corporation can use Ben as their new Spider-Man. However, this was positive for quite a while. Ben Reilly actually kind of found new purpose as Spider-Man. He discovered that Janine was alive. She had, like, her death had been faked. She was actually alive. And he kind of was living a better life at the moment. Peter ended up getting kind of recovered in a certain sense. And Ben Reilly went on a few adventures as, like, the proper Spider-Man for a while. Again, until it turned out that there had been some shady stuff going on with the Beyond Corporation. And I don't know if you guys are aware, but this story also has an ending that not a lot of people really agree with and is a bit controversial, but is also a story ending that was changed from what it originally was supposed to be. The original ending was, again, that Ben Reilly was supposed to end up being the main Spider-Man again, with Miles being the Spider-Man of Brooklyn and Ben being the Spider-Man of Manhattan. Ben Reilly and Miles Morales would have been the two Spider-Men together, and Peter would have stepped back from being Spider-Man for a little bit. Turns out they decided to go into a different direction right at the last minute, and the Beyond Corporation was actually evil the whole time. Ben Reilly ends up getting a tip and information that the Beyond Corporation had actually been messing with his memories because of his mental instability. And after finding that out, Ben attempted to try and take down the Beyond Corporation, or at least start making a plan, but the Beyond Corporation got to him first and erased his memories. Not specifically all his memories, but they decided to remove all of the memories of Peter Parker from Ben Reilly. So, after Ben Reilly was awakened as a clone, all of those memories from beforehand that he got from Peter Parker, when he woke up being a clone, he got all those memories from Peter Parker, they are all gone. Like, all of those memories of Peter Parker are all gone, and now he is only left with the memories of Ben Reilly, which starts to turn Ben insane. Again, Ben essentially blames Peter for taking away his memories, not realizing that it's the Beyond Corporation, and goes almost full supervillain and trying to kill Peter for blaming him for what he did, because he can feel that he's missing a whole bunch of memories within his mind. And Peter ends up beating him and ends up throwing him into a vat of psychoactive goo, which just is kind of there. I assume it's what the Beyond Corporation were kind of working on in the background. It's just kind of science fiction-y, a science fiction-y substance to power up people. We never clearly understood what it was supposed to be, other than it's bad. But Peter ends up accidentally making Ben fall into this goo, and Ben gets lost. Peter ends up leaving Ben for dead by escaping from the Beyond Corporation building as it all crashes down. And the ending reveal is that Ben Reilly is alive and has been mutated by the goo. And he has this costume now, which admittedly it looks cool, but the actual concept of this character that he is now, I personally think isn't very good. He literally decides to call himself Chasm, because there is now a chasm from where Peter Parker used to be in his mind. And he dubs himself as a new supervillain entirely. Pretty much, he doesn't really have any supervillain motivations other than to just get those memories back. He's not really a supervillain other than the fact that he looks like it, and the story kind of tells you. Chasm is easily my least favorite era of Ben Reilly. I actually really like Spider-Man Beyond when he is Spider-Man because they kind of start elevating Ben Reilly back into being his own hero. Making him fall down into a villain almost out of nowhere, and that being his purpose, I don't personally like it. It ends up leading into this X-Men and Spider-Man crossover called Dark Web. Chasm, again, is now a full supervillain wanting to take back the memories of Peter Parker by any means necessary. In this event, he ends up teaming up with Goblin Queen, who is a fellow clone. She is a clone of Jean Grey. You might be familiar with her from the Inferno event in the comics. You might be familiar with her in X-Men 97, episode 3 specifically. And it's interesting because they do have a lot of parallels, but Ben Reilly doesn't really have a lot to offer other than really wanting to kill Peter Parker in excess of his memories. And also creates a demon invasion. Spider-Man ends up taking Chasm down, and he gets put into this paradise purgatory where he can't escape, and he's kept there perpetually. He does eventually escape. He is now currently on the loose again, and I think he has a new comic coming up called Chasm Curse of Cain, but I haven't really gotten back to that. I personally don't like him as Chasm, and I don't personally like the Chasm era of Ben Reilly that he's in. I do absolutely expect him to have a Chasm Snap variant, though. That just absolutely makes sense to me. So, as of time of recording, Ben Reilly is currently the villain Chasm. So Ben Reilly has gone through a lot of change, as you can tell. I think the big problem with Ben Reilly is that he keeps getting reset. He keeps getting reset into whether he's this, like, tortured soul who's angry and violent to being a legitimate hero and wanting to re-establish himself as a person, to becoming a villain, to becoming this anti-hero, to becoming a full hero. He has his moments of sadness, he has his moments of happiness, he has his moments of pure villainy, and it does feel like Ben Reilly is a character that's gone through a lot of complications, which is the reason why doing a lore recap video is a little much. But he has actually been adapted into several media, despite how complicated of a character he is. For one, he did appear in the 90s Spider-Man the Animated Series show. In that show, the finale has Spider-Man meet with different Spider-Men across the multiverse. This was actually the first media to ever do this, and he does meet Ben Reilly, who is Scarlet Spider. In their reality, which is a separate reality from the main Peter Parker in the show, Peter Parker gets cloned. Neither Peter Parker nor Ben Reilly know who's the real clone, and his Peter Parker ends up becoming Spider Carnage. Meanwhile, Ben Reilly, as Scarlet Spider, wants to take him down. They even have a fun reference to Peter Parker saying to Ben Reilly, "This sounds like a bad comic book plot," to reference how no one liked the Clone Saga back in the 90s. Side note, the Clone Saga has actually gotten a lot of cult following status in recent times. A lot of people have actually gone back and said that they actually really like it, as, like, kind of not the normal take on the story. Like, most people would agree that it isn't very good, but a lot of people would actually consider it a cult classic that they like, that not a lot of other people like. Also, Ben Reilly has appeared in Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. He is voiced by Andy Samberg, and he's a part of Miguel's team. He's not a big part of the movie. He is mostly there to be edgy and brooding in the most 90s of ways, which I actually do think fits. I don't think it fits how Ben Reilly was in the 90s, but it definitely fits what Ben Reilly would eventually turn into, and it just really is an encapsulation of edgy comic characters being tortured souls. And I think the performance was very good. I hope to see more of him in the next movie. He also, I don't know whether to count this, but he also did have a live-action appearance. There was a live-action show back in the 70s called The Amazing Spider-Man, and there is an episode where Spider-Man does get cloned. This is technically an adaptation of the original, Clone Saga from the 70s, where Spider-Man just fights the other Spider clone. And it's okay. It's the show's not very good. However, we did get this iconic line that I absolutely love. Yes, Peter, you are me, I am you, and this is a gun. And it's great. So, comic recommendations for if you do want to read up on Ben Reilly, and personally what I reckon you should read for Ben Reilly. I reckon that you should read Spider-Man 149 if you would like to see the original 70s story with the Spider-Man clone. If you'd like to see when Ben Reilly is trying to find himself, that is a miniseries called Spider-Man The Lost Years. Ben Reilly officially becomes Scarlet Spider in Web of Spider-Man 117 and 118. There is also Spider-Man number 52 as well. There was a lot of Spider-Man books happening around the 90s, so try to find where, what starting point you would like to find within the whole 90s Clone Saga. If you would like to kind of have a series that was written in 2022 but focuses on Ben Reilly in his time as Spider-Man, I would recommend Ben Reilly Spider-Man from 2022. That's just called Ben Reilly Spider-Man. The actual issue where Ben became Spider-Man is Sensational Spider-Man number 0 from the 90s. If you would like to learn about how he returns to being Scarlet Spider after being the Jackal, that's Ben Reilly Scarlet Spider is the series. And then if you would like to know about his time with the Beyond Corporation, that is the Spider-Man Beyond arc. Alright, so in Marvel Snap, Ben Reilly is a 4 cost, 5 power card, and his ability is an activate, and he can create an exact clone of himself on another location. So, I don't know if the ability really fits him considering he doesn't like the fact that he's a clone, but I do understand what they're going for because Ben Reilly is absolutely the most clone character of all of the Spider-Man characters. If you were going to do this effect for anyone, it would make sense that it was for him. I do really like his effect. I like that whenever you want, you can create another clone of him to another location. So if you buff him up, you can create a more powerful clone on another location wherever you want. In practice, I've been playing with him a little bit. He is a little clunky as a 4 cost that you do need to activate, but I do really like him. I hope he can pick up some steam in the Snap, gameplay space, maybe get some buffs. I do really like him, and I do really like his variants too. So, I really love the Inhuak Lee variant. That one is absolutely fantastic, and there is also a rare variant, which is actually in the style of Ben Reilly Scarlet Spider. The Ben Reilly Scarlet Spider book that I just mentioned before, where he goes to Las Vegas, it is actually the style from that book is what this variant is from. So, I would actually really like to see as variants for Scarlet Spider in Snap. I would love to see his Sensational Spider-Man outfit get some love as his time as Spider-Man, as a variant. I would love to see him as Spider-Carnage. I just think that makes sense. Spider-Man Beyond, I think his Spider-Man Beyond suit is really, really good, so I'd love to see that as a variant in Snap. And you can also include his time as Jackal and Chasm as variants in Snap as well. I don't know if they would really fit, but Chasm just kind of makes sense as a variant, as much as I don't like the character. So yeah, that is Ben Reilly. As you can tell, very complicated character with a lot of history, a lot of back and forth, but I hope you at least enjoyed my rambling of attempting to explain everything about him. So, if you liked this video, I hope that you will give it a like and comment what you think about Ben Reilly. Did you understand his history? Do you have any questions about him? And I will be doing more lore videos like this very soon. The Venom season of Marvel Snap has just been announced for next month. I am very excited, so I will be doing lore videos on every single symbiote that is a part of that season. So please get excited for that. Subscribe and ring the bell like Ben crowed here. Ding 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 ding. He's Ben crowed. I love him. Anyway, see you guys later. See you in the next video. I hope you all enjoyed this one, and I will see you later. Mayday going down.